Resident Evil Requiem is pitched as a hinge point, the ninth numbered chapter in a series that circled back to the same crater in the map and asking what still lives there. Is it Capcom's 30-year self-audit as much as it is a sequel, a deliberately framed counterargument to every moment the franchise chased velocity and had the rare misstep, or the continued excellence of horror? You know me, these previews aren't blowing up wind. If something looks off or out of date or there's a problem with it, I'm going to point it out. This thing is dropping on the PS5, Xbox Series X and S, PC via both Steam and Epic, and that includes the Switch too. Like and subscribe. We always like to give stuff away to the people who are interacting with the channel. Let's cut through the bullshit first. Requiem is set in Raccoon City, not the bustling metropolis we knew from 1998. We're talking 30 years after the whole goddamn place got nuked into oblivion at the end of Resident Evil 3. The city's been friggin' sitting there, rotting away like a forgotten Halloween decoration, and now something's stirring in the ruins, making people disappear at the Wrenwood Hotel where Grace Ashcroft's mom died 8 years prior. So, like, instead of inheriting a nice dry cleaning empire, a nice hamlet in the English woods, or some Bitcoin, Grace gets to inherit a bioterror investigation and a serious case of daddy issues. Speaking of Grace Ashcroft, let's talk about our new protagonist because she's a departure, I think, from the usual Resident Evil musclehead squad. Forget Leon Kennedy's perfect hair, Chris Redfield steroid regime. We've got an FBI technical analyst who's described as introverted and easily scared by the director. Translation, she's basically the anti-Resident Evil protagonist, a bookworm who feels powerless because she's not proficient in combat like any of the other series heroes. This is either a brilliant move to make horror more relatable or Capcom's way of saying, hey, you know what? Anxiety that you feel when you talk to people at parties, yeah, turned up to about 50. Now, admittedly, they have had some protagonists like this, but usually they end up being quite good at combat as the game progresses. We'll have to see if that actually ends up panning out. The director even admitted that they always thought about making Leon the protagonist in this game, but making a horror game based around him was difficult because Leon doesn't scare easily, which, fair enough, the guy survived Raccoon City twice, fought a giant bat monster, and still found time to maintain some impeccable sense of style. The dude's practically a superhero at this point, but I still think that you could have probably made that scary. And we'll talk about some rumors along the way. Now, let's get to the gameplay because that's where the real meat of this one is. And I'm not talking about the kind of meat you find on a Resident Evil inventory screen. Requiem is shaking up the formula by offering both first-person and third-person perspectives that you can switch between at any goddamn time, which is a break from recent entries that were locked into first-person like a chastity belt. First person is the default, offering what Capcom is saying is tense, realistic gameplay, while third person is ideal for people who enjoy action-packed gameplay. In other words, if you want to shit your pants in immersive first-person terror, that's your jam. But if you prefer to see your character's panic facial expressions as they're being chased by a monster, third person has you covered. I love the dual perspective approach. I think it feels like Capcom's trying to have their cake a bit and eat it too. Yes, appealing to both the Resident Evil 7 purists who love that claustrophobic first person experience that they got in the game, not only in the VR version, but in the traditional version. And also, once again, to appease traditionalists who miss the over the top view of games like Resident Evil 4. And let's be honest, the Resident Evil games have never really ended up taking the cake when it comes to the animation. A lot of times, no matter what you're doing, it can always feel a little bit off, even in the first person modes. So I'm not too worried about it. The core gameplay loop for this one seems to resolve around one terrifying mother of a monster that stalks Grace throughout the entire game. Similar to, say, Mr. X from Resident Evil 2 or that crazy son of a bitch in Resident Evil 7. This thing sounds like pure nightmare fuel. We're talking about a creature that can stalk you through walls and ceilings, which is not something you want to hear when you're trying to hide under a table like a scared little kid. Your survival tactics include crouching and sneaking to, of course, make less noise, hide under objects because apparently the monster doesn't understand basic table physics, and collect glass bottles to throw as distractions. You've also got a lighter, and illuminating dark areas is one thing, but here's the kicker: the light will also attract the attention of the monster. So you're basically playing a deadly game of how much can I see before something horrible notices me? And additionally, light can also injure that actual monster, so, or at least slow it down. It's going to be a nice dichotomy, I think, of how much you use it versus how much you don't want to. Do you get it close to you and then turn off the light and hope that you can hide under a table? All of that will come out in the strategy of the title. What's particularly interesting to me is the persistent injury system that's been leaked, which sounds absolutely goddamn brilliant. Grace's injuries, at least visibly, they carry over into every chapter of the game, and including the cutscenes. And that's even more impressive when they're reflected in the cutscenes in real time. I think that just adds a sense of that fiction and form melding together. So if you're bitten on the shoulder during gameplay, you'll actually see that injury carrying over into some of the story elements. The blood slowly spreading around her shirt as she's trying to have some dramatic conversation. This isn't just scripted bullshit either. The injuries, they're dynamic and apparently unique to each experience. One demo that I saw showed the same gameplay playing out differently depending on whether Grace had recently been bitten or not. The level of continuity, I think, is something that we really haven't seen in Resident Evil before and in a lot of horror games, and it can make the horror feel actual, genuinely personal and inescapable. It's like the game is consistently reminding you that you're not playing as some invincible action hero who heals at every single stop moment, but you're playing as somebody who's actually a real person. The setting itself also sounds like it's going to be absolutely insane. First of all, it's gorgeous. The lighting, the shadow, the textures, everything looks great. The developers mentioned that they didn't do a physics simulation of exactly how Raccoon City was affected by the bomb, but instead thought that things were like, where the bomb landed in the city and how the shockwave would have maybe traveled through some of those areas. The result is supposedly a city that's been devastated, but still feels very recognizable if you've been there, with the team essentially stating that the existing design and layout of Raccoon City that we saw in Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes are still outlaid here. Imagine walking through the police station from Resident Evil 2, but now it's a crumbling ruin with holes in the roof and vegetation growing through the walls and maybe a bit of radiation, or exploring the streets of the city 30 years after the fact, with buildings reduced to skeletons and the whole place smelling like decay and regret, but also a tinge of nostalgia. Development-wise, Requiem has been quite a journey. On July 1st, 2024, Capcom revealed that the next main Resident Evil entry was in development. What's fascinating is that the game was initially conceived as something pretty much else entirely, an experimental concept that was scrapped during very early development because the team felt it just wasn't what the fans really wanted. Now, this sounds like a pretty bold admission from Capcom, suggesting that they might have considered something even more radical than what we're getting now, and we've seen those rumors of what it was going to be. Then, on August 20th, 2025, a new trailer dropped showing more of Grace's backstory, including a cutscene with her and Alyssa, which gave us insight into their relationship. The Tokyo Game Show revealed that a Switch 2 version was not actually originally planned, but after getting development kits and successful prototyping a port of Resident Evil Village, they decided to add Switch 2 support to the existing release plans. That is actually friggin' impressive. Instead of waiting to do a separate port later, Capcom just said, you know what, we're going to commit to bringing it day and date. Now, technically, the reason why it's so impressive is Requiem is absolutely friggin' stunning looking, as expected, of course, from Capcom's RE engine, which has been powering Resident Evil games since, I think, around 2017. That means you've got your full ray tracing, ray trace shadows, and all that good next-gen graphical stuff that makes horror games even more terrifying, especially that switch between light and darkness that is done so well if ray tracing is really dialed in. They've been showing off some impressive lighting effects, particularly in the hands-on demos where the interplay between the light and dark creates a really good sense of despair and, you would say, foreboding. One demo showed how you could flick room lights on and off, completely changing the tone of the space, while hallways were bathed in this weird red glow and kitchen areas had harsh flickering lighting. Those lighting details will also come into play depending on what you're fighting and what may be chasing you and trying to bite you. Now, let's talk about the additions and pre-order nonsense for a second, because Capcom's really outdone themselves with this special collector crap. You've got your standard edition, which is the base game, which is basically for people who don't understand the joy of owning some physical media that they'll put in a closet. Then there's the deluxe edition, which includes the base game plus 5 alternate costumes, because apparently we can't get enough of the vampire lady. 4 unique weapon skins, a pair of visual filters, weapon charms, bonus audio content, and additional collectible files that expand the game's lore. That bothers me a lot. Just saying it right up front, I don't like the idea of separating game lore into a special edition. If you're the kind of person who likes to show off, though, there's a Steelbook Deluxe Edition, which has everything that the premium does and 1 or 2 special physical objects. It gets more ridiculous, though. They have platform-specific stuff. PC players who pre-order it via Epic Game Store get Grace Ashcroft's costume to use in Fortnite after the game releases, because apparently the only thing more terrifying than zombies is having to see your favorite horror characters in a battle royale game. Nintendo fans, they get a Resident Evil Requiem-themed Pro Controller launching alongside the game. So you get it, I guess, if you spend $60. You also get a Grace Ashcroft amiibo, if you like that kind of stuff. And there's some other odds and ends when it comes to different collector's edition. Let's get back to the actual game, though. The monster itself, the one that's chasing you around, looks like it's going to be a worthy addition to the Resident Evil pantheon of terrifying enemies, described as a giant bug-eyed looking hag thing. That might sound a bit ambiguous, but we've seen it in the demos, and it looks haunting. I mean, the fact that it can barely fit through doorways and gives off a bit of a Little Nightmares feel for the dramatic size disparity between you and it adds to the terror. Now, we have seen that in other games, but it really does end up magnifying here, especially in the smaller areas that we've seen. There's something about a monster that's too big for its environment that makes it feel threatening and pathetic at the same time, which is a perfect combination for horror. And the ability for you to interact with it with various light sources, as well as just sneaking like a freak, is probably going to be one of the main linchpins of the game. And the familiar and the haunting is something we're seeing a lot in Requiem. It's how they've seemed to balance nostalgia with innovation. On the one hand, you've got the return to Raccoon City, the classic survival horror formula, but you've got a new protagonist who feels more vulnerable and I would say a bit more relatable to a lot of people. On the other hand, you've got a dual perspective gameplay. You've got persistent injuries, advanced graphics that actually replicate the damage that's been done, and some pretty sophisticated AI for the main monster. Capcom has essentially given us the best of both worlds, the familiar comforts of the series' roots combined with cutting edge stuff that makes the horror feel more immediate and personal, especially because we do know that the main monster, yeah, it can actually destroy some of the stuff that you've set up. So not every place is going to be safe anymore. Now we'll talk a little bit about some of the rumors. One thing that's been noticeably absent from the marketing is any real mention of returning characters like Leon, Chris, or Jill. This suggests that Requiem might be more of a soft reboot or a standalone story rather than continuing the main saga of the Resident Evil universe, though we have seen them try this before. While this might disappoint some fans who want to see all of their favorite characters end up in this game, I think it's a pretty bold move by Capcom, of course, depending on how it ends up being as a result and what they end up trying to pull as a sneak through. By focusing on a new protagonist, though, in a self-contained story, at least from what we can see, they can take a bit more risks with the narrative and explore different themes and branches that we haven't seen before. I would say it's similar in a lot of ways to Resident Evil 7 and a little bit to Village, which were both highly successful in their own right. The multiplayer situation is worth mentioning. Unlike some recent RE games, Requiem is single player only from everything that we know. Now, in terms of difficulty, they've also stated that it's going to be pretty challenging, but it will be fair. The monster stalking mechanic suggests that combat might be limited or ineffective, like a lot of the things that you can place around the game world. The environmental puzzle solving, rather than just shooting everything that moves, may end up returning us to an older feel. This return to that series' horror roots, I think, is actually welcome, especially after Village's more action-oriented approach. The fact that light attracts the monster, but it's necessary for navigation, creates a consistent tension and reminds me a lot of Resident Evil 7 and some of the fun I had in that game. I would also say that visually, there's a deliberate choice that they seem to have that reinforces a very serious, somber note to the story and setting, but at the same time is offering a dichotomy. Raccoon City, a massive place that you can explore, but also the smaller areas that you go into, like the hotel, and that switch off between them. Now, sound design is going to be crucial for Requiem, and from what we've heard, Capcom's taking that very seriously. The demo has Grace's erratic, terrified breathing consistently playing out. It's really well done. It's just brilliant because you can actually hear that character panicking, and it can cause you to feel the same. The ambient sounds of the ruined city, the creaking old buildings, the occasional distant growl of monsters, they're all going to have to be layered in perfectly to really contribute to this. And of course, we'll be looking for that classic soundtrack. Now, in terms of replayability, Requiem does sound like it's going to offer a lot of reasons to come back, whether it be the different puzzles, whether it be a plus game, all that kind of stuff. They've always done pretty well with adding different multiple difficulty levels, unlockable content, and collectibles. And you've got a game that I think will probably keep people engaged, well, at least far more than Resident Evil 3's remake. But it does seem like they're working pretty heavy on this. The narrative potential of this is actually pretty exciting. By setting the game in Raccoon City 30 years after the original incident, Capcom can explore a lot of what's going on here. Memory, trauma, the lasting effects of bioterrorism, monsters, and just family. Grace's personal connection to the city also gives the story a bit of that emotional weight. See, here's the thing. She's also an FBI analyst, which suggests there might be some heavier investigative elements to the gameplay, something that Capcom has shown small amounts for, but hasn't really ended up pulling the rabbit out of the hat yet. I want to see that because if they can piece all this together, that could be a fantastic title where it feels like you are truly whatever that character supposedly is in real life. One thing that's been particularly impressive about Requiem is how Capcom has maintained that air of mystery while still delivering some good reveals, whether it be trailers or some demos. They're very, very careful with what they're showing and what they're doing so that no matter what, even if you try to look at two demos and figure out where it's going, they've done a great job overlaying different parts and sort of overlapping them. So while you feel like, yeah, there's differences in these demos or these trailers, not a lot's been given out. Resident Evil Requiem shaping up to be exactly what I think the franchise probably needs, a return to form that honors the series' roots while actually pushing forward with some new ideas and advancements that we see in pretty much every one of these games. But we will discuss just for a second the rumors. The rumor is that there might be a Leon part of this game where you actually become that character for a while, or that they show up in it. There's been rumors and leaks and people saying that that's for sure happening. We don't quite know, but Capcom has been very close to the chest stating that really it is just this one main character. However, knowing what we do about the game's original intent and original ideas, I feel like there's probably a very good chance those rumors are absolutely correct. And we will see something like that coming out, or within the game, we'll see some kind of extra story. I think it makes sense, especially if you want to tie in Resident Evil Requiem to everything else. Really, the Requiem part isn't going to end up nailing anything if it doesn't feel like in some way it's connected. Requiem by itself, the word itself, does end up eliciting a feeling of history. You have to do that. And while we look at it and we can say, oh, it's going to be doing that with where you're going, how many years it's been, back to the city itself. True. All of that is very true. But also giving you a connecting byline of some kind, even if they decide that this is their next narrative branch, well, I think it fits to throw a character or two in there, at least maybe even just some information, especially when you look at that collector's edition and the idea that it's got extra files in the game's lore in that edition. That does make me suspicious that there is going to be some overlap. But boy, do I not like the idea of that being in a collector's edition. That just feels absolutely broken to me. What doesn't, and what does actually feel like one of the more exciting parts, even though the developers have stated it's not the majority of the game, is the creature hunting you. And let me describe to you why. Ray tracing is in many games, and the honest truth is, other than reflective puddles and people trying to bring the graphics cards to their knees with a cyberpunk demo that they want to show with a new version of higher fidelity ray tracing, a lot of times we don't see a great effect. We see a better looking game in many ways, and in some ways, always not so true. But the idea that a creature like this will follow you around, be scared of bright lights, and then also at the same time be able to work through different supposedly safe zones that you have and damage them to cause you to have to continue moving. If all that comes to fruition, that kind of unique placement of, let's say, light rays to where you turn on a flashlight and you can see exactly where it's going to hit or where it's not going to hit. We have seen it in other games without ray tracing, but the fidelity that you can offer there, the fall off of light and the different ways in which you can reflect darkness and light and shadow, they're intrinsic to horror most of the time. It's why you don't see a lot of horror movies directly based in bright daylight. The idea of that, and Resident Evil, honestly, their continued lineage of excellent titles. Capcom has nailed it pretty much every single time. They understand how to make a game. They understand intrinsically how to make a Resident Evil game. Almost every single one of their titles has been excellent, and only a few are considered maybe good. This is a series that has had a continued lineage, and it's crazy to sit here and say that the game is going to return to something 30 years ago, and then you look when the original came out and you say, damn, life imitating art. And to me, that is fantastic. And hopefully my life is even better when I get to play this, because consistently they have nailed it. Give it a thumbs up if you like it, thumbs down if you don't, and leave a comment. Also, remember, we like to give away things to our subscribers, so feel free to subscribe as well. That'll be it for me. Check out the new previews that are coming in the next couple days as well. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.